These two verses, the first verse is the glorification of Bali Maharaj by all the heavenly beings, and the second verse is the response that Vamanadev has to Bali Maharaj's offering everything. And we see how in the first verse that we read today, it's listed out that the Gandharvas, the Kimpurushas, all the heavenly beings are actually celebrating Bali Maharaj. And it talks about how Bali Maharaj is an exalted person because he has performed a very difficult task. This particular section of the Srimad Bhagavatam is very dear to my heart because back in 2005, when I was in South India with a big entourage of devotees, along with Rasanath Swami, we were staying in this place called Kanchipuram, which is considered to be a very holy place for the Vaishnavas. It's one of the three most important places for the Sri Vaishnavas. Also a place where Ramanujacharya spent a lot of his time. And I was staying in a place very, very close to a temple. And I'll just speak about the temple in a little bit. And in the morning, early morning, I woke up and I found that I had lost my way. I woke up, I was going towards the place where all the buses were standing because the devotees were supposed to go out on a tour that morning. And somehow I lost my way. And I was loitering early in the morning, it was 4:30 a.m., around this time of the year. And I accidentally stepped into a temple that I didn't even recognize was a temple. It was an old building. And I was alone and I was a little scared and know what to do. And I stepped into this temple and I found that the pujari, very early in the morning, he was actually pulling out water from a well, and he saw that I had come in. And he was very excited that somebody had stepped into this really old temple, perhaps a temple that not too many people visit. And he invited me, he stopped what he was doing, and he invited me. He was a Sri Vaishnava, you could see his tilak, and he invited me to come into the temple. And so I didn't know what to do. I just followed him. And then he opened the curtains. And behind the curtains was one of the most beautiful and mystical sights I'd ever seen. It was a deity of Vamanadev, who was so huge and so majestic. It took me, you have to look up, you have to really raise your head in order to see his entire size. The name of the deity, I later on realized, he was called Ulaga Alanda Perumal in Tamil, which means, Ulaga means the universe or the world. Alanda means one who measured the universe, and Perumal is how they address the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And so when I read through these sections of the Srimad Bhagavatam, I always remember my time accidentally stepping into this temple and having the darshan of all alone, this most beautiful and majestic form of Vamanadev with his head, with his foot on Bali Maharaj's head. And when the pujari showed me the darshan, he had tears in his eyes, and I think it was his recognition of the tilak, the Vaishnava tilak, and I think some recognition of Srila Prabhupada, that he actually just looked into my eyes and said, the future of the Vaishnava tradition lies in your hands. And I felt so, I felt as though I was given a burden of sorts. And I will never forget that experience. I considered that as a very beautiful blessing coming directly from Vamanadev himself. So this when I was reading the Srimad Bhagavatam in preparation for today's class, I was just thinking about accidentally stepping into that really beautiful temple and interfacing with that pujari whose heart was so beautifully melting in his devotional service to Lord Vamanadev. So today's session, the the demigods begin to glorify, or the heavenly beings begin to glorify Vamanadev or Bali Maharaj, because he had done something that was so striking that despite his knowledge that Vishnu had come there to take away everything from him and to give it to his enemy, to his arch enemy, Indra, that he did this. He did that despite knowing that Vishnu was on the side of his enemies. In fact, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Paribhashya Sutra of the Srimad Bhagavatam. Anyone know the Paribhashya Sutra of the Srimad Bhagavatam? Can anyone share? This Paribhashya Sutra means the essence, the verse that really defines the purpose of the Srimad Bhagavatam.
Etecha amsha kalapumsa krishnastu bhagavan swayam.
Swayam, that's right. Etecha amsha kalapumsam krishnastu bhagavan swayam. The next two lines.
Indra ari vyakulam lokam hridayanti yuge yuge.
Indra ari vyakulam lokam hridayanti yuge yuge. So the glorification of Krishna in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Paribhashya Sutra, actually contains the word Indra Ari. And Indra Ari means those who are enemies of Indra. And this verse describes how Lord Krishna protects this universe from the enemies of Indra. So Indra is actually glorified in the Srimad Bhagavatam right at the onset, that Krishna appears to protect Indra and to defeat the enemies of Indra. And yet we see how in this beautiful section that not only does Krishna protect Indra, but in the method that he protects Indra, he also actually reciprocates to the deepest devotion that his dear devotee Bali Maharaj has. So the character of Bali Maharaj is explained and is glorified and recognized by even the heavenly beings. That the nobility of recognizing that this is my enemy, and despite this being my enemy, I'm just going to give everything to this person. So as a Kshatriya, one of the qualities of a Kshatriya is that the Kshatriya never goes back on his or her word that they give. There are many examples in the Mahabharata and in the Vedic scriptures that describe the qualities of these of the Kshatriyas, that when they give a word, they don't take it back. And their generosity is that despite when somebody comes to them to get a benediction, or when they make a request or ask of somebody, or somebody makes an ask of them, the Kshatriyas, when they give their word, even if it is at the cost of their own life, they actually live by their word. This is the nobility of the Kshatriyas. We don't really get to experience these kinds of qualities in today's day and age. So the Kim Purushas are glorifying Bali Maharaj for living up to that quality of honoring his word, knowing that he will actually be defeated. Now the contrast to that is actually brought up in the next verse, and then I'll explain the contrast, why it is a contrast. And it's not really a contrast if you understand the deepest meaning. But externally speaking, it appears as a contrast. And the reason why it's a contrast is, in this verse, Bali Maharaj is being glorified. And in the next verse, what Vamanadev does is he's just about to make Bali Maharaj an absolute failure, even in his own eyes. So many times, in the discharge of devotional service, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains this in Madhurya Kadambini very beautifully. There are 6 categories in the stage of Anartha Nivritti, and Anartha Nivritti is considered to be the most longest, arduous very intense stage in the 9 stages of ultimately reaching prema, or pure devotion. And anartha nivritti is the cleansing of the heart of unwanted things, things that come in the way of the soul's natural propensity to serve Krishna in pure love. So anyone can, if anyone has read Madhurya Kadambini, if you can share with us what are those 6 categories of 6 categories that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur speaks about in the stage of anartha nivritti. Anyone? I know there are scholars in the audience. There are people who have extremely well read. Hridaya Daurbalyam, that's true. That is true. The weakness of the heart, and Krishna also tells Arjuna in the Gita, Kshudram Hridaya Daurbalyam, weakness of heart, yes. I'm asking specifically for the 6, sometimes people call them stages, sometimes you can call them categories, specifically in the stage of anartha nivritti. Okay, Gaur Kumar Prabhu, Utsaha Mai, Ghana Tarala, Vyuda Vikalpa, Niyamakshama, Vishaya Sangra, and the last one is?
Tarangarangini.
Okay, Tarangarangini. Can you define what Tarangarangini is?
Like being taken away by the waves of fame that accrues by the execution of devotional service.
Okay, very interesting. Being taken away by the waves of fame accrued by the performance of devotional service. So as we advance in our spiritual life, there are manifestation of qualities that bring us glory. And in this case, we see how when Bali Maharaj, he is performing devotional service by surrendering everything that he has to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And he is being glorified for that, because what he did was extremely difficult for anyone to do. So even in our performance of devotional service, we will begin to see how when we advance, when we start to do things that are difficult to do, internally, externally, then we are glorified for that. Both sometimes the glorification comes from even advanced Vaishnavas. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur explains how in the stage of anartha nivritti, or removing of the unwanted things from the heart, that specific stage called Tarangarangini, which is one begins to enjoy the fruits of one's execution of devotional service, which means the fame, the prestige, the resources that come when one performs devotional service, because people deeply admire and appreciate this Vaishnava. So when one begins to enjoy that, then one actually starts to slip from the performance of pure devotional service. And it is a very tricky stage of bhakti, because externally speaking, it may still look like we are performing devotional service, but internally, there is pride, and there is enjoyment of the glories that come from performance of devotional service. But the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna, knows so much more and understands what we really need. So in the execution of devotional service, we'll see that the biggest impediment is the sense of superiority that comes by execution of devotional service, even when we are not necessarily externally exhibiting it. It's internal. So externally, we might still be honoring other devotees. And then internally, we might be thinking, oh, look at how great I am, that despite me actually being greater, I'm still honoring other people. You see how subtle this is. And then sometimes also, and I've experienced this in my own life, that the false ego experiences, I read once a quote that by one of my favorite writers. His name is Richard Rohr. He's a Franciscan friar. And Richard Rohr talks about how more problems are created in this world by offense takers than offense givers. And I have seen in my own performance of devotional service how I have been an offense taker several times. And once I found myself actually thinking about how I have forgiven this devotee um, for things that this person said, told me, that I felt that my false ego felt very upset by. And then I felt that I had, inside, I was actually feeling very happy that I had forgiven someone, that I had actually gone beyond, and Krishna would be really pleased with me. And life moved on, and until a certain stage where Krishna brought back the hurt feelings. And when he showed me how I still hadn't actually overcome my own hurt feelings, I also recognized that the illusion that I had forgiven and gone beyond, that illusion had actually come because I actually felt morally superior to the other Vaishnava. And moral superiority is a very dangerous thing in our devotional service. It's like a very deeply seated weed that grows alongside bhakti, the creeper of bhakti, that eventually chokes our performance of pure devotional service to Krishna. And this moral superiority many times can actually come at the cost of even Krishna sometimes. And in this case, we see how it could have been easily possible that Bali Maharaj, when he was giving charity to the Supreme Lord and being glorified by the heavenly beings, that in the heart of hearts, he could have had moral superiority, meaning he could have actually felt that he was greater than Indra. And he could have also felt that, it's almost like, see, Krishna, you've come to take away everything from me. And for a Kshatriya, this is very subtle. This is a very subtle thing. Let the world know that Vishnu had come to ask me for charity. And in that process, he wanted to deprive me of all my power. And I still didn't refuse it. Right? So the last straw of the false ego is this feeling of this desire to be glorified for my morality. That is the absolute last straw of the false ego. It really holds on to that. And we see even in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna's arguments to Krishna were moral arguments. They were not necessarily spiritual arguments. And that's why there is a very fine line between understanding what moral principles are and what spiritual principles are. And that doesn't mean we should neglect the moral principles. But even within morality, there is pride. And when Krishna actually chastises Arjuna in the beginning of the Gita, why he's chastising Arjuna is because he's destroying Arjuna's very subtle attachment of the false ego to morality. And again, this stage is this particular stage of being attached to morality is a very high stage. And yet, that can also come in the way of performance of devotional service when our sense of prestige, when our false ego is standing on the foundation of our moral superiority. And that is a very difficult thing to discern. So we see even in the Mahabharata how when Karna is asked for, right before he was about to fight Arjuna, Indra comes in the disguise of a Brahmana, and he asks for charity from Karna. And as charity, he is asked to give away his armor. It's almost like a cloak of invincibility that he has. And Karna gives it away. And Indra, who's actually the father of Arjuna, who's Karna's arch enemy in the Mahabharata, Indra's heart also gets very soft because he sees the valor, the chivalry of Karna. Right? And Karna makes a declaration: let the world understand that Karna never refused anything. Right? So there is a nobility, there is a pride that comes with it, and yet that pride is still rooted in the false ego. Is still rooted in the fact that it's almost like the immortality project of the false ego. That even when I die, let me leave a legacy behind, and that legacy is important. And at the same time, that legacy can be very rooted in the false ego trying to remain immortal. But the immortality ultimately is the exquisite property of the soul. The false ego, whatever projects of immortality the false ego creates, eventually is destroyed by time. But somehow it does create an illusion that we can actually live on forever in our quote unquote legacy of the false ego. So in this case, we see how the contrast in the verse before, Bali Maharaj is actually being glorified for what he did, which is to live his word. And in the next verse, and Prabhupada writes this purport so beautifully, the purport starts by Prabhupada saying, Bali Maharaj wanted to give charity to Vamanadev, but the Lord expanded his body in such a way that he showed Bali Maharaj that everything in the universe is already in his body. So the pleasure of having given charity to the Supreme Lord was taken away by the Lord, because the Lord is revealing by his own expansion that actually everything already belonged to me. And then further on, we will actually see that when the Supreme Lord expands to such a size, he takes over the entire world in one step, and then he basically takes over the entire universe in the second step. And then he asks Bali Maharaj, so you have failed in your word. Right, so he makes Vamanadev, makes Bali Maharaj an absolute failure. Not just privately. This is actually in front of his own people, in front of his enemies. This is like a public display of quote unquote humiliation, right? That is just about to happen. And I think I quoted this last time. C.S. Lewis, in his book, The Problem of Pain, talks about, I really like this quote. He says, humiliation comes before humility. And we can experience this on a day-to-day basis if we really look at our own lives. That Krishna is really showing and trying to destroy the false ego, and it is not a pleasant experience, especially especially for a person like Bali Maharaj, whose entire sense of identity in this material world is actually based on nobility, which, honestly speaking, in the world that we live today is very rare to find and is extremely glorious. And yet, that is not what the Supreme Personality of Godhead wants. What Krishna wants is our heart. Is our heart completely devoid of any sense of false prestige. And the reason why Bali Maharaj is actually glorified as an example of Atmanivedanam is that is the highest form of surrender. It's the complete relinquishing of the false ego, where not one trace of the identity of this material world can last. And that's why Srila Prabhupada, when he was explaining what sannyas was, I was recently reading a purport from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, where when Mahaprabhu takes sannyas, he recites a verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam, and Prabhupada writes an amazing purport about the mood of sannyas. And the mood of sannyas, Prabhupada said, was when a sannyasi actually dies, no one even knows that he has died. This the idea behind that is the false ego. Ultimately, the false ego takes heart in the fact that at least someone knew that I was dying, right? And even that is actually like given up. So this is the story. The contrast here is the simultaneous glorification and the humiliation that's happening of Bali Maharaj in these two verses, where the glorification is the glorification of his nobility and his character. And the humiliation is the Supreme Lord making absolutely sure that there is no trace of false ego present in the heart of his dear devotee. And Bali Maharaj is so dear to Vamanadev that the Supreme Lord is actually eternally present in his kingdom, and standing outside of his door, guarding the doors of Rasatala. So this is the Supreme Lord's mercy on us. And I cringe when I say that, because I shudder at the thought of actually even going through the experience that Bali Maharaj went through. And yet, if deep down we desire pure devotional service, or desire to desire pure devotional service, or desire to desire pure devotional service, we will also receive the strength to relinquish our false ego fully and completely at the feet of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that desire alone is very pleasing to Krishna. So I would like to stop here and open up for any questions, comments, insights, realizations, please.
Hare Krishna. Thank you so much, Rasanath Prabhu. I invite everyone, if you would like to ask a question or have a comment, please feel free to unmute yourself. Today, due to some technical problems, I'm not able to start the video of everyone. There is some recording issues, that's why. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Rasanath Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
You can hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you well. Thank you.
Wonderful class. An interesting warning, right? We very extensively and explained how it feels so dangerous. And as devotees, we're trying to do something good, but then you might get trapped in being proud of that do-gooding thing, and that's definitely a legitimate concern. And then we want to go on to point out that even though there are subtleties and more subtleties and danger and things we should be very careful about, we have a simple solution Srila Prabhupada has given us. We say, even when in the Jayam prayers, all glory to the temple, Hare Krishna, all glory to the Hare Krishna, immediately as somebody glorifies us, we pass it on to our spiritual master. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Not some glories to Srila Prabhupada. Whatever I'm able to do, whatever I'm able to say, whatever I'm able to try for, accomplish, it's only by his grace. It's only by his grace. He asked us to do it, therefore we tried. Whatever comes, it's by his grace. We attach to the endeavor, not the result. So there's a definite danger and there's a solution. We remain transparent and pass on we remember, Chedi Raj, remember Chedi Raj?
Yes, I have.
Disciple. Very funny Jewish kid, and one time the devotees were praising him. Chedi, you read the best kirtans, you give such nice classes, you're doing so wonderful on Sankirtan, distributing books, collecting donations. We're so inspired. And Chedi Raj was just like, with his hands, like taking it in, like coming, posturing his hands toward himself. Yes, 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 yes. Taking the praise, take it. And I was thinking, what is he doing? And then he started polishing his fingernails on his chest and breathing on his fingernails as he was polishing them. He goes, well, what can I tell you? My spiritual master is making me into a jewel. So he immediately passed the praise on to Srila Prabhupada. You know, he didn't reject the praise, right? Because people will appreciate what we do as devotees. And then we say, oh, glory to Srila Prabhupada. And then we're free from getting caught in that subtle pride, that thing that might happen if we're not careful.
Thank you very much for
Prabhupada.
sharing that example. The Maya is so tricky that even as we are giving the glory, just like Bali Maharaj, even as we are giving the glory, we are finding ourselves glorious in giving the glory. And that's how subtle the false ego is.
There's no solution. It's not possible to just say, oh, glory to Prabhupada and really mean it.
I think, and even when we really mean it, it's so, I actually think that that is the best way in which we can do it. And at the same time, really also understand our own fallen condition and be very, very honest about it. Because that honesty ultimately is what will help remove the anartha. The Gaur Kumar Prabhu is asking, thank you again, Rasanath Prabhu. I can honestly admit that a big part of my devotional service is in the Tarangarangini stage. How do I come out of that stage and genuinely perform devotional service without the pride that comes with it? Again, my experience is very limited. I am trapped, probably not even in that stage. I'm probably trapped in the stages even before. So I am actually unqualified to answer that question. And so I would like to open this up to other Vaishnavas. I'll share something that I have understood and heard from other advanced souls. But before that, I would like to open this up to other devotees who would want to respond to that question. Anyone at all? Garshan Prabhu, anyone, please. Please. Okay, so as service, I will just respond. I think what it will take is it will actually really take the being very transparent about. It's almost like really exposing our attachments very, very honestly to the Vaishnavas. And talk and really being able to say, this is what is actually in my heart. And there is a certain level of disgust that we need towards the false ego. We have to feel disgusted with it. That's why our acharyas have also explained how, in fact, Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, it's very gross the way he actually explains it, but it's very powerful. He actually says that the glory that is sought after by the performance of devotional service is like smearing, is like, again, I'm sorry it's gross, but I have to say it. It's like smearing stool on one's own body. And there is a certain experience of disgust that comes with it. And the Tarangarangini stage has the highest level of hypocrisy. And as a practitioner of devotional service, when we want pure devotional service and exclusively desire pure devotional service, then over time, and I'm not saying immediately, over time, one has to feel disgusted with with the material things that one is desiring. And that disgust will be experienced. In fact, what will happen is uh, glory will come, I will taste it, and then as I taste it, I feel like, what am I doing here? What am I doing? Uh, and there's just this, that was just so, what did I just do? And then Krishna explains in the Gita, it's a necessary experience, because that reveals our own fallen state. And then we very deeply pray to Krishna to release us, and then find ourselves caught up in it so strongly that we can't break ourselves free from it. And then our prayer is just like Gajendra's prayers: Krishna, release me from this somehow. I just don't want this, because it's coming in the way of desiring pure devotional service. I just don't want this. So the thing with anartha nivritti stage, and this is what the holy name does, the holy name reveals our anarthas before it destroys it, because we have to make the choice. Krishna never takes away our free will. And making that choice is one of the most difficult things. So again, I'm saying from my own personal experience, it is a very difficult stage to be caught up in Tarangaragini, and yet we have to pray to be released, very deeply pray to be released. And in my own experience, the only thing that releases us is the heartfelt blessings of the Vaishnavas, because ultimately that is the only thing that can release us from the shackles of the false ego. Which is why utter humility is necessary, and meekness is necessary. So that's my simple response to your question, Gaurakumar Prabhu. I know you know the answer to this. I'm just responding from my own unrealized vantage point.
Thank you, Rasanath Prabhu. Sorry, I was just setting up the camera. I couldn't ask my question. If anybody else has a question, they can go ahead. Otherwise, I can ask my question. Okay. So as like you were discussing, and Adipurush Prabhu was also expressing how like giving all the glories to Guru and the Parampara actually like is a solution. And as you rightly said, it's very easy to okay, the darshan is here. I'm not sure. Yeah, sure. Bro, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Of course.
Means it's even though like what Prabhuji was saying, like it makes like sense. At the same time, as you're saying, it is so difficult to do. It's very easy to say that, but it is very, very difficult to mean it from the heart. And sometimes we get the glimpses of I should be like that kind of an experience, but it just gets covered like by the next few moments, like it just like vanishes. So difficult. And also even to just remain in that stage is difficult, like because all these other 5 stages are also like pushing, and it's not just like if other things have been overcome, that's one thing, but it's just one of the many problems. So that
Yeah.
sometimes it feels like, oh, will I ever like break through the shell, like am I like ever going to make to the next stage of like a
Yeah.
stable devotional service? So
Yes.
how do we make sure we don't lose heart, at the same time understand this is just the pain, necessary pain that we need to go through to actually feel that disgust about all these things, and that's naturally take that shelter, even though
Yes.
it feels like so much. Yeah, I'm just going to do it. It's so easy, but
Yeah.
it's so deep. It's not so easy. So how do we not lose heart at the same time, like keep practicing and going through the same thing again and again, and
Well,
not becoming insensitive to it? Ah, it's
yes.
okay. This is how I am. It's okay. I can be like this. So
Yes.
how?
it's such an incredible question, because I think again, this is meant to be conveyed in the most respectful way. I don't think we speak enough about the stage of anartha nivritti, or even when we speak about the stages, it's very theoretical. Anartha nivritti is a very delicate stage in our devotional service. It requires a lot of care to walk through. And again, borrowing some from the Christian tradition, the idea of the dark night, to me, is the final stages of anartha nivritti. And I'm sure most of you have heard of the term dark night of the soul. But the experience of the dark night is that I have not yet seen Krishna on the other side. I don't even know if that's true. But I have basically decided to leave behind the material world and all the identities that come with it, and that space in between is a space that's filled with doubt and still material attraction, and it's a very difficult one to walk. What's interesting is that there is a cosmic battle that's happening in that stage. And externally speaking, when a devotee is walking through that stage, externally outside, other devotees are seeing this devotee, they're glorifying this devotee. And it just seems like everything is normal. But the battle that's happening internally and the intensity of that battle, very few actually really understand, unless they can only understand unless they've walked it. And that's a stage where Krishna's presence is felt in our inability to give up the performance of devotional service despite despite the difficulty. You see how tricky this is, right? That's the first experience of Krishna. And again, not to make this esoteric, but the Acharyas explain how even in our stage of performing devotional service in this material world, there is some experience of what the gopis experience in separation from Krishna. And the experience of the gopis in separation from Krishna is, this is torture. I don't want this. I rather that Krishna is just here, or I just get fully released from even thinking about Krishna. And yet they can't do that. It's like I feel like I'm a prisoner at that point, right? Like I can't walk away from performing devotional service. And at the same time, I can stay in it. That stage is also experienced by a soul trapped in the material world. In the final stages of anartha nivritti, when we are really fighting the battle, we will see that is a stage of. That's why the austerity there is actually pretty deep. Others may not necessarily understand this externally, but internally there is a cosmic battle, and the devotee willingly chooses to be there because there is an experience of Krishna that happens. It's not a physical manifestation, it's the manifestation that Krishna is seeing my struggle. He understands my struggle. And I'm willing to wait in this space until Krishna releases me from it. Right? That is the, we see that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, and Narada, Krishna is telling Narada, unfortunately, you will not see me in this lifetime. Right? There is the voice of Krishna that we hear in our heart. Keep going. Keep going. So that's one thing. The second thing is we also then very deeply study the lives of saints and people, and take guidance from people who have walked it. And you will see when that guidance comes, the people who have walked it know what that struggle feels like, understand it very deeply, and can very carefully guide us and encourage us. And when we look at ourselves, it's amazing how beautiful that is. I remember Bhakti Tirtha Swami speaking about this days before he left. When we see ourselves through the eyes of those devotees who are seeing us, and when they're saying, come on, it's only a little further. Come on, just keep coming, just keep coming. I remember Bhakti Tirtha Swami said this so powerful, but was one of his last lectures he gave in Gita Nagari, and he said, I broke down after I heard this. He said, it is it is an absolute tragedy when it is the last door that we have to walk through and Krishna is just waiting on the other side to give us everything. And the devotee actually says, you know what, I'm just good here. This is great. He said, what a tragedy. I'll never forget how he expressed it. So when we are with devotees who actually encourage us and inspire us and act as cheerleaders, who have walked that path themselves and who basically say, come on, just a little more, keep going, keep going. Those are the two things that really give us the strength to walk that, to one, stay in that space of, you know, I could call it there is voluntary suffering there. When we have not yet fully experienced Krishna. And then keep walking. And the lives of the saints and people and the great devotees who have walked that path is the shining light that keeps us encouraging to walk it. And we also experience Krishna in a way that prevents us from stepping off the bandwagon, that prevents us from like saying, okay, just be here. Sorry, that was a very long-winded answer. I apologize for.
Thank you so much for the amazing answer and taking out your time. Very grateful to you for your time. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna. His grace
Thank you
Rasanath
all.
ki jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Right.
Hare Gaur Premanande, Shri Hari Hari Bol. Shri Radha Murlidhar, Shri Gaur Chandra ki jai.